Welcome to the Redeeming the Dirt podcast. This is Noah Sanders, and today I'm joined by my friend Johann as we're going to talk about an exciting question that hopefully is pertinent to many of us in the Northern Hemisphere, at least right now, which is how can we prepare our garden without a tiller? It's springtime here in Alabama, and we are enjoying new lambs and new puppies and all the new daffodils starting to come up, and we just love that springtime, just new life that we see. We've been planting potatoes, and so this is when all of us kind of get that itch to start planting stuff. But on our farm here, and a lot of what we've done with our teaching and what we've learned from Foundations for Farming in Africa, we put in our gardens here in Alabama in red clay without any tiller, which is very foreign concept to a lot of people. And we love to talk about that, but it's something that it is an overflow and an expression of our faith in Jesus and trying to honor his design, but it's not like a legalistic thing. And yet, many people that we talk to that have hard red clay or have just, any garden they want to prepare it, it's really challenging to think about how would they prepare that if they didn't plow it or they didn't till it. And some people are excited. Actually, I have a lot of hits on my blog on an article we have on called How to Prepare Your Garden Without a Tiller, because I think some people, maybe you don't even have one. So how can we garden this spring, even if you don't have a tiller, or if you do have one, should you use it or not? And today we want to talk a little bit about some of the practical aspects of that and a little bit of maybe how we should think about that as Christians. And so I have today my friend Johann, who's from Africa, and he's going to help us discuss this topic because he has a lot of experience in growing and in thinking about this and working with soil and soil stewardship. So thank you so much, Johann, for being with us today.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Noah. Really a privilege.
Yeah, so Johann and I met several years ago at a Foundations for Farming forum in Zimbabwe. He's been working in Malawi for many years. I'll let him introduce himself a bit more, but I've just always been so encouraged by Johann, his love for the Lord, his ability to just in on a farm, out in the field, just really showcase God's glory, just be excited about farming, but more so about Jesus, and just to really bring those things together and articulate it. And I was watching a video you sent me earlier today, Johann, on the beautiful crop that was from about 7 years ago. That's actually the first time I ever heard you say anything. Was a friend of mine shared that on his blog, and I just loved the way that you talked about the sunflower in that video, and I'll share that in the show links. But just so grateful for your heart for the Lord, and would love to just have you briefly introduce a little bit about yourself for people before we get into the introduction and kind of what God's done with you so far and kind of a bit of your experience.
Awesome. Yeah, so I've just come out of a 25-year season in Malawi, Africa. It's a small country in Central East Africa. With my beautiful family, my wife Rieta, we raised 4 girls in Malawi. And yeah, it's just really been a privilege to be living there. I think our children grew up with a very interesting worldview, living among amazing people, very hospitable people, beautiful people, so peaceful. Malawi has never had any war. One of the few countries in Africa that can boast about that is known as the warm heart of Africa. And yeah, but also surrounded by severe need and poverty. And most of the population in Malawi are subsistence farmers. They live from the soil. Literally, that's how they survive. They depend on the soil for their living. And when we started engaging with the local people there, we started working at an orphanage. And we did that for 8 years. We had 130 orphans that lived on the property where we were. And we had to host these children, put them through schooling, feed them, and raise them. And we had quite a bit of land there. And I knew zero about farming. So I'm sorry, I'm not really an agronomist. But I was thrown into the deep end because the board members of the orphanage said, "Why do we have to send money for food if you have all this land?"
Mm.
So that sort of propelled us onto a journey towards agriculture, which I never really pursued before. So, and I think all my agricultural acronym that we've gained over the years have come from farming, not from a classroom, but from actually trying to grow food in a subtropical climate, with a lot of heavy rains, a very definite dry and wet season. And so I'm now in Knoxville, Tennessee, at the Crown Financial Ministry's home office, helping them to develop training material for Africa. So quite an exciting journey for us to be here.
Great. And you had a little bit of opportunity to get some gardening experience uh, in the U.S. I think it was last year, wasn't it?
Yes, we were privileged to have access to a small piece of land, and we started a little veggie patch there. And this is in Tennessee. I'm telling you, this place is like a rainforest. It's very humid in the summertime, and the stuff just grew amazingly. I was surprised. I mean, we harvest so much from a little piece of land that we had to just give away so much veggies, and it was a privilege. I also built a compost pile, and yeah, could rent it or hire a chipper, and we've got lots. I found it hard to find organic matter, in the springtime or after the springtime, because that's when we arrived here. But later, of course, after the fall, there was just all these piles of leaves everywhere, and but yes, a few weeks ago, I'm still separating our waste. We're putting our organics in one bin and non-organics in another bin. And I find people here don't do that. Very few people actually do that. But I took our organics and I went back to that compost pile I built, before the winter. And I thought, okay, I'll just incorporate it on the top of the compost pile, and when I turn it again, it will become part of it. And I, it was solidly frozen. So it was my first time to see a frozen compost pile. I could stand on top of that thing. It was just hard. I could throw my stuff on top, and that's where I had to leave it. So that's a new experience for me. I struggled to get a nitrogen source, which would cause it to heat up. So it didn't heat up as I wished it would. So yeah, I'm still learning where to find manure, where to find organic matter, and so on in our environment here. But yeah, it's quite an interesting experience.
Yes, I just received or saw a post on Redeeming the Dirt Academy from one of our students, and they had just built a compost pile. And she showed the picture with snow on it, but it was still they had built it with nitrogen, so it was. She said it was still hot even with the snow on it.
Wow, that's what I believe you could see. You could build it in the winter time if you had that nitrogen source. Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's get into a little bit of this topic of tilling and plowing and preparing our gardens. So when I think of in the U.S. here on a large scale, people think about plowing on a garden level. A lot of people have these rotary tillers. And I think the first question I want us to kind of discuss is, why do we till? Why do we plow? Why is that the current way that we approach preparing the land and historically recently? And why might we decide not to do that? We'll talk about that in a bit. But why do we till? And I'll just say, for a lot of the people here in my community, when you want to start a garden, oftentimes it's just grass. It's a grassy spot and it is or it's weeds left over from last year. So the biggest motivation to start with, I just give the one reason. The first reason that comes to mind is we want to
Mhm.
get rid of the weeds or whatever's growing there so that we can have a garden. So that's one reason that comes to mind. So when you're thinking from an African perspective, or in the context you come from, why do we normally till or plow? Why is that typically the approach?
Mhm. Yeah, I think that'll be the same in Africa. The only problem we had in Malawi is there were no tillers. People were not having access to tractors or not even to oxen. So they all use a hand hoe, and it's an amazing implement. I mean, I feel lost if I don't have one after my experience there. And what they would do is they would literally till the land by hand. So they would dig it with that hoe and turn it upside down and turn the weeds, they would incorporate the weeds into the soil so it could die. In the winter or dry season, they would burn to clear the land, and then they would till it by hand. And it is so laborious, and they're so determined to do that. And it's really, but the first thing they will do is they will just weed the tall grasses that would stand there. And then after that, they will dig it and turn it in. So that's an obvious reason to start tilling. And then, of course, another reason would be people believe that it will help with infiltration of water. So you need to get the land softened up, because if it's too dormant for quite a while, of course, the soil is very hard. I mean, I've worked on soil where you take that hoe, it just goes cling on the soil, and you could barely penetrate it. So to get it softened up, and you have to turn it and till it, uh, so that you could get water penetration, but also root penetration. That's what people argue. And then I think the other thing would be, to be able to maybe mix your organics into the soil to get that organic top layer mixed into your soil. So those will probably be the main reasons why people want to plow or till the land. But I, through my experience now on that land of where we were at the orphanage, when the American board started to ask these questions, they actually acquired a tractor for us and a plow. Was knowing nothing about farming. So I learned how to use that, and I started plowing the land for these reasons. And we had quite slopes there, and then we saw quite a lot of soil erosion with the heavy thunderstorms that you get in Africa after plowing. And what I found is the creeping grasses after plowing, man, it's like you stimulated them. Instead of getting rid of them after the first rains, wherever we plowed, we saw even more weeds coming up. It was just like you were stimulating these creeping grasses. And that was really hard to manage. We eventually ventured into using herbicides, and I actually got these battery-operated knapsack sprayers, and we would walk and trying to kill these creeping grasses with herbicides and even Roundup and all of those things. That's all people were, that's all I knew what to do. I didn't know what else. And then this group from Harare, from Zimbabwe, came, and they started teaching us about foundations for farming. And man, it was revolutionary. It just changed everything for me when they started talking about mulching the land and least soil disturbance and all these principles that they claim were coming out of how God makes things and how God works. And I started to take meticulous notes and really starting to apply what they've taught us. And we started on a small scale. I think we had about 4 hectares, which maybe in a homesteading context is quite big, but for a farm in Africa, that's quite small. And we started to apply those principles where we took the previous stover of the crop and we just slashed it and left it on the ground. And wherever we put in contour ridges also on the slopey land. I learned how to make contour ridges using a simple A-frame uh, method. And we built these contour ridges, and then we planted vetiver grass on the contours. And then we mulched the land as much as we could. And this vetiver grass would grow out quite tall. So before the planting season, we would cut the vetiver grass, which added mulch. And I could actually get about 6 feet of mulch cover, continuously along the contours with this grass that I grew, which helped me to mulch the land. And in the first season, after we started applying these methods of mulching, we stopped the plowing, we put in contour bands, we tripled our yield on corn, where we used to harvest, I think we used to harvest 1 ton from a hectare. We now got about 4 tons from a hectare. In one season, it changed to 4 tons.
Wow.
So that really was, man, if we can do it and we didn't use a tractor, we were just using a hoe, then the whole country could do it, And the big problem is food security. So it really was an enlightenment for us that there's a simplistic method that you could use that could eradicate hunger in Africa using a hand implement. So it was very exciting. Yeah.
That's amazing. The Let's talk just a bit about what is it that tilling does to the soil. We talked about why we till. I mean, we're getting rid of the grass. We're trying to keep it weeded. We're trying to keep it from being too hard where the water runs off. Maybe we're trying to incorporate fertilizers into it. But for all those benefits, you experienced a lot of benefits from not doing that. I've also seen the same thing. And so, what is it that tilling is actually doing to the soil, and how is it? How is the soil designed to work? Can you give us a little bit of background on that?
Mhm. Yeah, I love to go back to Genesis and the way God created things. And of course, then the soil becomes very interesting because when you realize that everything that moves on the earth was formed out of the soil, it means that there's something special about soil. Even us, ourselves, were formed out of the soil. Every bird that flies, every creeping thing, every animal on the earth was formed out of the soil. God could have just spoken it, but he chose to use the soil as the substrate for every living thing on the earth, except the fish, it seems like the fish just was there. But this becomes interesting. So, in a way, the soil must be very special to God. And then we start to think about what is soil, and where did soil come from? And we know that, I mean, at first, the earth was covered with water, and then the Lord brought the land, so the mountains came up, and the earth and the land and the sea was separated. Now, at that stage, I I'm not sure. I don't think there could have been much soil. Imagine, mountains rising up and waters running off these mountains in the lower parts and the oceans being formed. I think that was probably just bedrock at that stage. So I, I I know people believe in a literal 7-day creation, but I'm wondering, how did the soil come to be there? Because God needed soil to create, and He needed us. And what is soil? Soil is basically humus that broke down, and minerals, a rock that broke down and got eroded into smaller particles. And so we get these different layers of soil. We get the different horizons. If you start to study soil, the O horizon, which is basically the decomposed plant matter right on the top. And then you get the A horizon, which is the topsoil, which is basically the organics mixed into the mineral that's been broken down. And then you get the subsoil, where it's mostly minerals and eroded rock. And then you get the weathered bedrock, and then eventually the bedrock. So you've got the strata, and it changes in color from lighter to darker as you come to the surface. And the more organics you have in your soil, the darker your soil will be. And so I'm not sure where God found the soil. And the soil, there must have been a process for the soil to form, to be created. And then he took that soil and he shaped man out of it. So in our molecular structure, I mean, he says, from dust you are, and to dust you will return. I don't know from which layer he took us, but probably from the topsoil. I don't think it was the O horizon, because then it would just be leaves and twigs and things that's decomposed. He didn't say he made us from compost, but he probably made us from the A horizon of the soil strata. And now soil becomes, to me, in a sense, uh, I don't want to say it in that way, but almost like holy, like all of, oh, wow, okay, this is the substrate I come from. So when I start to look at soil in that light, I start to be careful how I work with it, you know. And if you look at what God said to Adam and Eve, and he said, cultivate and keep the garden, those words, even the word soil, which I think the Hebrew is Adama, and he calls Adam after the soil.
Yeah.
We are so connected. We're so connected to the soil. And, but he says, I don't want you to destroy this. I want you to cultivate it and keep it. Now, if we think of a laboratory and you ask a scientist to cultivate, something that he maybe wants, like a fungi, what does that mean? It means grow it. It means you put a little spore maybe on a petri dish or whatever in certain circumstances, and you let it multiply and grow. But if we hear the word cultivate today, we think of plowing. I don't know
Yes.
where it changed. But if you go and look at the original meaning of that word in Hebrew, cultivate, it really means to care, to tend it and cultivate it. It means to protect it, to create the ideal environment for everything that's in it to thrive. It's not about turning it and breaking it. It's the opposite. It's take care of it, be careful with it, and rule over it, have authority over it, and bring order in it. That's the whole concept that I see when God blessed Adam and Eve. He says, be fruitful, multiply, rule over the earth. So we need to come. There must be strong intervention, but that doesn't necessarily mean, to destroy things or to turn it upside down. Because if we start when I discovered the soil the first time, I was with my friend Daryl Edwards in Zimbabwe, and he's an agronomist. And we were on his farm, and we went to get a sample from his compost, that mature compost, and he took it, he shook it up in a little container of water, and he took a drop from there, put it on a little petri dish, and he put it under the microscope, and we were able to see, I was able to see with my own eyes the living organisms that was there, Now, I knew about these things, but I'm telling you, it's different when you see it with your own eyes and it happens right in front of you. First of all, he took a little ant, and we could actually see through the ant's head. It was translucent, and it was amazing. I mean, the mandibles and everything was so beautiful and amazing to discover. And then that was like at a 40 times magnification, I think. And then he turned it, and then we put, different things. Then he put the little droplet on there, and we looked around there and we found mites. There was a little mite on the side of the glass dish, and it was you could barely see it with your own eyes, but when we put it under the microscope, you could see this mite. I mean, again, this funny shaped body and the mandibles and the tentacles and all of that and the legs. It just intrigued me. And then he went, much. Then we could see fungal strands, and you could see also they are all translucent. You could see through this stuff, and to see the fungal strands and so many of them, and then to see the bacteria. Man, I mean, that's just crazy. And there's arthropods, there's just billions of things. I mean, in 1 teaspoon of soil, you find, I would always say in Malawi, how many people are in Malawi? And they say, okay, 19 million. I said, in this teaspoon of soil, there's much more than 19 million living organisms just in this little teaspoon of soil. Actually, there's more living organisms probably in this teaspoon than all the people on the earth. And it's just crazy, the of life that you find in the soil. Then you start to realize, oh my, this substrate is alive. There's almost nothing above the surface that's got so much life as a tiny square of soil. It's just teeming with life. And if we see it, if we can become aware of it, we will walk much more carefully on it. And if we start working with it, we will work much more carefully with it. And then when I started studying it, okay, so what are these guys all there for? And, and Daryl explained to me, that topsoil, the air horizon, is aerated. So that's where you find the aerobic organisms that needs oxygen, that needs air to live. And that's probably the first, I speak in centimeters, so first 12 to 15 centimeters. And it's amazing that they need air, but they are the main decomposers. So they would take the organic matter, the mulch cover, that the leaves that fell from the trees, the 1 year grasses that dies off, and all the annuals and the things and the twigs, and they will start working on it and decomposing it. We also get the earthworms, which is amazing. I mean, the night crawlers would come out at night, they grab the leaves, they pull them in. You get the termites. Sometimes when in Africa, if we walk past a field that's got organic matter on it in the dry season, you hear this noise. Literally, you can hear them. What's that? What's that? And you go and study and you think, is there a critter running here? What? Why am I seeing nothing? You come really close, you realize it's termites. And they are busy shredding all this organic matter with their little mandibles. They are the shredders, they're the guys who cut things into smaller pieces. And they just go like crazy. And you could hear them, man. And then you get the earthworms, and they create these cavities, lateral, up and down, and they've got this slimy substance that they give off. And as they move in the soil, they create almost pillars because they bind the soil particles together with that slimy substance as they move, and it becomes a strong straw in the soil with a coating, it binds the soil together. And it actually holds the soil up in a way. The roots of the plants that die off, they also pillars in the soil. They also keep the soil up in a way. So it prevents compaction. And God, in his wisdom, has created all these amazing critters and creatures for our benefit. And then you get the other guys, like the bacteria. What are their purpose? The aerobic bacteria. They can decompose much smaller particles that the shredders and the earthworms and those bigger guys cannot do, and the mites. And then you get, the fungi that exudes enzymes, that can chemically destroy or break down molecules and things and decompose it. And in all these processes, these critters are busy eating. So they're eating organic matter. It goes through their digestive system. It comes out on the other side as fertilizer. And they just got compost makers. They are God's plows. They are God's aerators. They are all have specific a purpose in the soil, and they were designed. They were not just happen there. It designed. There's a godly design in all of these living organisms. And man, as Daryl was explaining this to me, it was like, I don't know if any of you have ever gone diving, but if you go and dive in the ocean at the coral reef or what, it's like you always just see the surface of the sea in the water. And Matt, you get in there and you have your goggles on and you could see all the life that's in the ocean. Man, it's like a whole new world opening up to you. The colors, the diversity, this it's just anemones and these shell creatures and the fish and the different colors and the seaweeds and plants that's growing there is phenomenon, and you marvel at this whole new world you're discovering. That's what it was like for me when I looked under a in a microscope, and I discovered this new world under the soil, and it's alive. It's teeming with life. Um, and I said, man, I was never really so aware of it. And then you go with a hoe or a tractor or, whatever farming implement, and you come. Imagine if you were one of those living organisms. You are in the soil, you're in this top layer, you're an aerobic organism, and your whole mandate for the purpose of your life is to decompose, to aerate, to bring organic matter into the soil. And you're doing that. That's your life purpose. God has designed you like that. And you're very happy doing it. Of course, people are also, I mean, these guys, they're also eating each other. There's predators among them. There's so much happening. They all eat, they excrete, creating fertilizer. They have very short lifespan. They die, they become fertilizer. They eat each other and it becomes fertilizer. Everything that happens there, their life cycle is around creating organic matter and making nutrients available to the plants. So, and now suddenly we are happy here. Let's say the ceiling there is the soil surface, and this is the soil. We are happy. There's roots coming down here. There's earthworms moving up and down. There's termites making their burrows here and whatever. There's a lot of air available to us. There's a lot of food available to us. There's moisture. The moment it rains, it infiltrates easily through all those cavities that's been created. The soil has got a structure because the organic matter is holding it together. The roots are holding it together. And we have enough air, we have enough food, we have enough moisture. There's a mulch cover on top of the land. That's how God created and designed it. It retains the moisture for us. It protects us against the heat and the cold. There's a blanket that's an insulation for us. It also protects us against the heavy raindrops or the hail or whatever might fall on the ground. And we are just happy. We're in this moderate climate, moist, full of food, full of life. And here, the crown of God's creation, the one that was made in God's image, you know, the Adam comes and he puts a plow in this beautiful substrate, this medium way we all are alive and thriving and multiplying. And he turns us upside down. He takes that big plow and he turns the soil. He puts the B horizon, the subsoil, he throws it on the top, and there's no organic matter in that. It's the least fertile soil in the strata. And he takes us, who are supposed to have air, and he throws us at the bottom, and we become subsoil. And suddenly we don't have access to oxygen anymore. We don't have access to food anymore because the food was on the top there, the layer. And this Adam that's supposed to know God, that's supposed to be the Son of God, that's supposed to understand this design that the Father has put together, he comes and destroys everything. And we all die, man. Those of us who can survive, we get up there trying to find air, Then he comes with chemicals, he sprays Roundup or whatever, pre-emergence herbicides. And the few of us that's still alive, we're getting this concentrate of chemical and we die. And then, oh, now the soil is not fertile enough, so they come with synthetic fertilizers and they throw that in the soil. Oh, the few of us that's still surviving, we die because of the high concentrate of these salts and chemicals. And systematically, Adam, that's supposed to be the one that was to cultivate and keep, is becoming the destroyer. And systematically, we destroy all life in the soil and all structure. We break down that beautiful pillars that was created over so many decades, I mean, thousands of years. Those beautiful woody, the roots that died off and all of that. And the source of sugars coming exuded from the roots. I mean, if we were like bacteria, like rhizobium, what we need roots to be attached to, we produce nitrogen and all of that for the plants. We live in symbiosis with these plants. All of that is gone. All that life is gone. That whole synergy is gone. We've upset the whole system that God so carefully designed, and nothing is sustainable anymore. And now we need to supplement this dead substrate with chemicals, with synthetics, and all kinds of things to make our plants to grow. And it's just so crazy. And we're all doing it. The whole world is doing it. And I don't know how God feels about that. How can we call ourselves children of the living God, the creator of heaven and earth, if we go exactly against his design? And now farming becomes so counterproductive and so unsustainable. And his heart is breaking for us that lives in such, lack of understanding of what he tried to put together for us. He's given us everything that we ever needed for our garden to be sustaining itself. And we just go and destroy it all because of a lack of knowledge. We are suffering. And now, so that's my story of the soil. I have seen it firsthand over these last 25 years. If you stop, so how do you get to a place where you've done this over years and you want to restore it, So I would say the first step is stop plowing, stop burning. But how do I open this field then? I mean, there's grass growing everywhere. Just weed it, surface weeding. Just cut the roots with whatever implement you can have. I use a hoe and turn it upside down and leave it there to die, in the dry season, and let it become the mulch cover that was originally there. Just a surface, just cutting the roots of those weeds. And the next thing you're gonna struggle with is you say, but the soil is so hard. You think it's hard, but you pour a bucket of water over it and you'll see it infiltrates. It might be hard, but there's so many cavities in there. If the soil was virgin land and it stood for so many years, I can promise you it's got an amazing structure. It took so long for God's creation to create that structure, all those cavities, that the porous in it, and it could really feel hard, but that doesn't mean that the roots won't be able to penetrate. You plant something there, I can promise you, you will be surprised at how those plants can produce. And the infiltration will be there. The aeration is already there. The organic matter is already there. The life in the soil is already there. The best soil you could ever try to find is virgin land. And you've got a responsibility as a steward not to break that, but to cultivate it and keep it. That call on our lives have never changed. We are in a new covenant. God never revoked it. So it's still valid for us. That call of stewarding the beautiful land that is trusted unto us. And so stop cultivating it. I mean, stop plowing it, stop turning it, weed it, leave the weeds as a mulch cover. The next thing is stop with the chemicals, get the chemicals out of the soil, and put organic matter in there. A fast track to restore your soil is compost. Compost is not a fertilizer. Compost is an inoculant of life. So if you make compost, you're basically bringing all the ingredients together that all these organisms I just talked about just love. You give them food, you give them an energy source in the form of sugars in the green material, in the form of nitrogen in manure, leguminous plant. You give them moisture, in watering the compost or soaking it in water. You give them organic matter. You give them everything their hearts desire. And the natural decomposition that happens in nature, in the virgin bush, you put it on a fast track. Man, that could have taken maybe a whole year or 6 months. You do it now in 6 weeks or 8 weeks because you've given them everything they ever desired. It's like microorganisms on steroids. And they will do this work within 8 weeks. They could decompose huge piles of organic matter if you're and Noah has got all the teachings on how to make compost. But if you can make compost and then you make a small inversion in your soil, and you could throw it on the land, just cover the land with compost, then cover it with mulch. Man, it'll just you inoculating your soil with life. You putting it on a fast track of restoration. If you want to plant, maybe vegetables that you need to transplant, heavy feeders that you first plant in a seed bed and then you transplant it. What I would do is I'll dig a little hole and at the right spacings, and I'll incorporate my compost in the hole before I plant. But I already have compost on the surface too. The more you can never give too much compost, never. It will restore clay soils to loam soils. It will restore sandy soils to loam soils. Just God's creatures will start working, and it will change soils. It can change hard, infertile places and restore them just by leaving it and feeding it. And then I would say, start with rotations. Start with proper rotations on your crops. Don't just grow one kind of crop year after year or season after season, but get a rotation going of legumes, heavy feeders, light feeders, and so forth. And intercrop with, there's so many studies, and Noah is so great in sharing these things with us. So from my experience, all of this work tremendously. I have grown corn in Malawi, rain-fed, no irrigation, using these methods, and I was harvesting 13.9 tons from a hectare. And, where the average yield of Malawi is maybe between 1 and 2 tons a hectare.
Wow.
And if I tell people when this corn, when they see my maize, we call it maize there, they can't believe it. They say, "Oh, you've used a lot of fertilizer." I said, "I didn't buy one drop of fertilizer, and I haven't used any on my fields for years. But I've built up my soil through this mulch cover, through the organic matter, through incorporating compost, and I'm harvesting close to 14 tons per hectare from land that's not been had seen any synthetic fertilizers, for the last 10 years. So it works. And
Mm,
it's not about trying to feed the plant, it's about restoring the soil. When you restore the soil, if that's your focus, you build a sustainable garden. If
mm,
your focus is to get maximum yield from the plant, you'll never get sustainability. That's not your aim. Your aim is to restore the soil and bring life back into the soil, and your garden will become sustainable. And you could plant stuff there without even putting any compost after a few years, and you'll just see it thriving. Yes. So
I like to
talk
think of it as
a lot, Noah.
no, that's great. I like to think of it as, we also have milk cows, and when milk cow to, or in cow to feed their own calf, I don't have to worry about how much they're eating. I don't have to worry about how often we're feeding them. I just have to make sure that the mama cow is getting what she needs. And if she's getting what she needs and she's happy, then the baby cow, the calf, will be perfectly fed, just the right amount, just exactly what it needs. But if I'm bottle feeding it, which is what we typically do when we plow and destroy that fertilizer system and we have to bring in fertilizers, then you have to be very specific. How much are you feeding, how often are you feeding it? It's much more precise, even if it's an organic
Mm,
fertilizer that's
that's
manure
true.
based. But it's that's why
Yeah,
compost is so forgiving, because it's like a mama cow feeding the calf. It'll do it by itself, and you can't overfeed it. She
yeah.
won't overfeed the calf. And that's a beautiful
Mm.
system. So what would one of the things that I like thinking about when we're talking about this is I love this idea of this biblical perspective, and really how does a biblical worldview, is what we're kind of talking about, impact the way we look at plowing and soil stewardship. But then there's still, the Bible talks about plowing. Jesus talked about when you put your hand to the plow, don't look
Mm.
back. We see beating your swords into plowshares and your plowshares into swords, depending on the verse. So it seems like there was plowing in the Bible. It wasn't condemned by God as sinful necessarily. So how do we think about that as Christians? How should we think about plowing from a
Yeah.
biblical worldview, especially in light of the fact that it's been something people have done since biblical times?
And- Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of references to plowing in the Old Testament. And so, and when I studied it, I realized that, like, if you think of that verse you just quoted, about the swords into plowshares. So what does a sword look like? A sword is so narrow, you know. How can you make a plow out of a sword? Um, that indicates that it's really just a tooth. It was probably a wooden instrument with a metal tooth attached to the front of it, a sharp metal tooth, and it was pulled by oxen. And it's just to break that top layer of soil in order to get seed soil contact. I mean, you don't expect you're going to get a yield if you just distribute the seeds on top of the surface of the soil. I mean, the birds will come and eat it. It'll wash off with the first thunderstorm. There's no seed soil contact, and therefore the moisture also cannot penetrate the seed coat of the seed. So you need good, every farmer knows, you need good seed soil contact. That seed must be surrounded by soil, and it must stay there. And when it's all, the whole surface of the seed coat is surrounded by moist soil, that's where germination happens the best. And you also need that heat that's absorbed by the soil from the sun. So you need heat and you need moisture and you need light. Those three elements for a seed to germinate and thrive. So that's why it's necessary to do disturb the soil and get the seed into the soil and get it surrounded by soil for it to germinate well. But that's probably at the deepest 8 inch, depth of soil disturbance. And it will be more like a furrow that was created. They didn't have the plows that we have today, where that can actually go up to 12 inches and then turn it. It was a tooth that pulled through and created a furrow. It was more like a ripper. Today we have people do rip this today with very deep tooth in order to break a plow pan, so root penetration can be better. I'm not against that because it doesn't turn the soil, and it does help. If you had soil that's been plowed year after year, you actually get this hard pan of soil that water cannot penetrate, the roots cannot penetrate deeper than that. And then people come with a deep rip tooth to break that right in the line where they're going to plant their plants. And that might be needed to do, when you start off. But it's not going to turn the subsoil to the top or the topsoil to the bottom. So that was what they did. They were just pulling a tooth through the soil. Then they could get the seeds into the soil and good seed soil contact for good germination. So wherever you read about tilling, it's at the most 8 inches deep, between 2 and 8 inches in the Bible times. They used animals. They hadn't had that drought power that we have now with tractors and all these 4x4 tractors and 6x6 tractors. So it was a surface, tilling for that purpose. We see that actually happening in God's creation with the antelopes. If they run, it's a heavy animal with a small hoof, and that hoof is penetrating. I mean, in Africa, we get these huge migrations of the wildebeest, for instance, and they come into this after the rains. There's these grasslands, beautiful savannas, and huge herds of wildebeest or antelope will go over it. And as they run, the hoofs are beating the soil and they literally plowing it up. But how deep? It's just this deep. And the grass, the seeds from the grasses are getting mixed into that. They also defecate and they fertilizing it and plowing it, bringing seed soil contact all at the same time. It's an amazing system. And the next season, you'll see beautiful grasslands there because the antelope grew their own food. So we're trying to do the same. We just want to do surface. So I could use my hoe and dig a furrow to get seed soil contact. I could use my hoe to dig holes to plant something bigger there. But I'm not going to take my hoe and dig the entire garden and turn it upside down. No, the only reason I'll use it is to get that seed soil contact.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is when we talk about plowing or tilling, um, there's nuance to that. There's not just one way that looks like. And historically, you're saying that it was shallower, more just to, kind of a ripper kind of plow, most likely. We see um, that in historical pictures and stuff. I actually have in my one of my books here this picture of for those of you who are looking online. It's not very doesn't want to be still fuzzy. But in ancient Egypt, you can see it's a very pointed kind of plow, very small plow. It's interesting in Isaiah 28, it says there's this passage where it talks about when a farmer plows for planting, does he plow continually? Does he keep on breaking up and harrowing the soil? And it kind of goes on saying, like, there's a right order to do things. He doesn't just plow forever. He prepares the soil, then he plants, and like there's a systematic way to do it. And it's always interesting because at the end it says his God instructs him and teaches him the right way. So there's an implication there that there's a right way, to do things when we're stewarding the soil. And there are obviously ways that are, not good stewardship. And I think I love this idea of what Jesus said when he said, the son can do nothing by himself. He can only do what he sees his father doing, because whatever the father does, the son also does. And that's from John 5. And so I think a biblical worldview, we really want to come with this idea of how can we see what our father does? How can we honor that? How can we begin reflecting that, appreciating that? When the knowledge is not there, we're going to suffer when we're not seeking him, when we're not observing that and appreciating it, like we see in so many places of the world, or in poor agriculture, we're suffering. It's not like necessarily we're, purposely sinning there, because the Bible talks about, everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial. Everything is permissible, but not everything is constructive, is what First Corinthians says. So we want, though, not just to think about what's allowable, but how can we reflect the Creator? How can we learn how to steward the land, like you said, that growing, cultivating, making it better than it was before, recognizing that ever since Adam fell, like most of mankind has not reflected a right relationship with God. We've reflected a wrong relationship with God and a broken relationship with his creation as well. So we need to be in this continual like humility of how can we be doing this better? I was reading this morning where it talks in Jeremiah about like ask for the ancient paths, ask for where the good way is and walk in it. And ancient is not just like 100 years ago. It's like, how did God intend this originally? What is the good way that he originally designed that we can then, try to be in line with? And I think that's where it's so helpful to recognize this overflow of this heart of acknowledging God as a creator, wanting to honor him, and it not just be about a legalistic what's allowable or not allowable, but a sitting at the feet of the creator, listening to like you said, this wonderful picture you painted of this incredible design that, if we can partner with that in the soil, it's so much more beneficial than if we ignore it or destroy it. And of course, God shows grace, and it's amazing the soil will still grow something, even when we do plow it, or even when we do till it. But how much more benefit is there if we're not doing that? So as we're wrapping up here today, I want to talk just a few tips for people that want to actually get started with their own garden plot. Let's say a non-African context in America. First, Johann, share how did you prepare the garden there that you cultivated last year, and then I'll share a bit of what we do before we wrap up here.
Yeah, so we basically we first had to put a fence around it because there's white-tailed deer roaming around and rabbits and so on. So we just put some stain, and we got very cheap netting on Amazon, and we just put the netting around on the stakes, and that kept the deer out. That was very cheap and easy to do. And then we just weeded that portion. There was grass growing there like a lawn, and we just weeded that and sort of put it aside on a pile, all the weeds. And then I measured 110 centimeters. What would that be? 2 feet, around about 2 feet wide. I made walkways, every 2 feet, of maybe 40 centimeters. What's that in inches?
You don't make me convert it on the spot, Johann.
Okay, sorry.
We'll look it up later.
About this. Well, yeah.
There we go.
So I made walkways in between the 2 feet portions, and I sort of used my hoe and just took the topsoil from those walkways, and I threw it, on top of the 2 feet portions to create these beds. And they were nice and straight. I used ropes and pegs, and I wanted to do it at the high standard. And so I made a raised bed. It wasn't raised much, maybe just this, and but I got the topsoil from my walkways and I threw it on those raised beds. And then I had a portion that I dedicated as a seed bed where I planted, the stuff that I was going to transplant. We already started earlier in the season propagating seedlings in the house, when you still had frost, so that by the time the frost wouldn't be there, we could transplant them quickly into the veggie patch. And I also purchased some nice, healthy, organic seedlings from a friend who had a farm. Yeah, and then we basically got some decomposed manure from a horse farm. And I first had to find out where, how the grazing of the horses happen. And I was wondering if they are using herbicides on the grazing, and they did not. So the horses were keeping the grass down, and it was all organic system. Because you need to be careful also where you get your manure from, because if the horses would be feeding on hay or anything that was sprayed with herbicides, you would get that through their system into your garden, and you might be killing your veggies with it instead of growing it. So you need to be careful where you find your sources of manure. and organic matters such, you could get dead grass that was killed by Roundup and try to compost with that. I don't think it's going to work well. So try to find organic sources of organic matter if you want to make compost or you want to find manure. I didn't have time to make compost at that stage, so I got these guys had mountains of horse manure and they were lying there for years. So it was totally decomposed. I could apply that directly so I just covered the bed with that manure and I had ample supply of it. And like I said, if I grew bigger veggies like the kale, which grew so big, and my peppers and all of those things, I would dig a little hole and add compost in the hole before I transplanted those. And it just thrived, man. It was amazing. We just kept on harvesting from there. Yeah, so that's how I did it. And we getting ready to plant again. Um, of course, we found that the kale you shouldn't plant too early. It's better to plant. It got totally white with pests, and but it grew out again later in the season. So, but I would plant my kale a little bit later. Some of these leafy crops probably later in the season, not in the heat of summer. And then, but all the others, the solanaceous crops, peppers, and all those things did great. And your root crops did great. You could plant them also later in the season. You could plant your garlics and onions and all of those when it's quite cold already. So yeah, that's how we did it.
Awesome. Yeah, I just love we've done this many times here in Alabama, just preparing, like Johann, like you did, just removing what's there either through smothering it with a tarp or, heavily mulching it or chopping it off
Yeah.
and then applying compost and then keeping the mulch on. And it was amazing. This last year, we had carrots in just straight red clay where we had put compost on top and kept them mulched. And they were, several inches in diameter, 4 or 5 inches long. Like we have 9 people in our family. 2 or 3 carrots was enough, to add to any meal for us for supper by the time we chopped them up. So it's just amazing to see that production. And I just love that it's all going back to saying, look, I don't understand how all the soil works. It's amazing when I hear about it, but I just know that when I go into creation, there's minimal soil disturbance. There's not this huge inversion. There's a mulch on the ground, and I'm just trying to do what my father does, what I see my father does, and then wow, I can give him credit when I have these incredible results. And it's so much easier, and it's much more affordable as we're trying to teach people in our community who don't have a lot of resources. There's just so many amazing side effects of trying to do things God's way because it gives us that ability to point back to him. And that's what stewardship is really, so much about. It's about acknowledging his ownership, allowing his principles to speak into any area of our life, whether it's our relationships or finances or the land itself. And then that gives us opportunities to testify and to witness to other people of the work that he's doing in our life and in our land and the work that he can do in their life. So I would encourage anybody that's listening. We have on Redeeming the Dirt Academy, we have videos showing exactly how to do land prep. We have videos on compost making. I'll include in the show notes here a free checklist on steps to do to prepare some ground for planting without tilling. And then we have the Wellwater Garden Handbook, which you can download for free at the wellwatergardenproject.org, or you can get it on Amazon if you look up Wellwater Garden Project. And it has a step-by-step kind of the layout like Johann was talking about of the paths and the beds and all the different steps for putting in a no-till garden, but really doing it and showing how to do that in a way that flows out of that heart of humility, acknowledgement of God, and then how do you actually use that to teach and train other people. So really encourage any of you who want to learn more about that to check that out. We're also going to have an after show with Johann where we're going to go into the question of how to talk about new methods, how to talk about how do we farm God's way, talk about plowing versus not plowing, especially in a Christian context or with other Christians or with non-Christians without being divisive and judgmental. And so that's a question. If you're a member of Redeeming the Road Academy, that you can pop on there and get some and join in that conversation. But I really appreciate it, Johann, for you just taking time with us today and sharing some of your insights and just your passion for God's the soil and God's creation and just how He made that, and really inspiring all of us to want to learn how to work with that better. And I would love if you have any final thoughts, and then if you could just pray for the listeners that God would bless their garden this year, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, I remember times where in Malawi, where we were growing all these crops, we were growing many crops, different crops, and to walk in that garden, after you've put in all that work, and to see the corn just so tall and two cobs on every stalk, and to see the mulch cover, and the joy and the worship that rise in your heart, and to think that God created this plant. And I know I mean, those were hybrid plants, but so man has intervened. God has given us wisdom to make plants grow even better, and through breeding and cross-pollination and all of that. But that wisdom also comes from God. But just to be in awe of these creations, these plants, and I really, I mean, I've sent Noah a link of a little video clip I made in Zimbabwe, in Harare, where I'm walking among these amazing crops, and I'm just overwhelmed by God's creation, the beauty of it, and the fruitfulness of it, and that I was able to put one tiny seed like this in the soil, and it produced two cobs. And if I counted the pips on those cobs, there was 600 pips on a cob, on the primary cob, and the secondary cob was always a bit smaller, but you would have at least 400 pips on that one. So to get that one seed produced 1,000 other seeds. And on top of that, this huge biomass, this huge stalk, and all those broad leaves and things. And I just think this is a miracle. I mean, and I had the privilege to take the seed and to put it in the soil exactly in the right depth, to prepare the soil for it to thrive and see germinate and grow. Now, I can feel this way about a plant. How much more will God feel about us? And we come from even a much smaller seed. and and here we are, living creatures, able to create things, to think and to thrive and to multiply, and humans are this most beautiful, amazing creatures that God has ever made, truly in His image. And to think how, if I could feel that way about a plant, how must God feel about me? And how does He want to cocoon me and cultivate me and tend me so I could grow into everything He has meant me to be? And Ephesians 2 verse 10 is always such a beautiful verse for me. We've been recreated in Christ Jesus unto good works that God has predestined us to walk in. And each one of us, each one of you listening, there's a purpose for you, just like those microbes. There's a purpose for the shredders, there's a purpose for the fungi, a purpose for the aerobic bacteria. There's a purpose for you in God's great design. And what's amazing about your purpose, there's not one other person on this earth that could fulfill the purpose that He's given you, because it's unique, special. Your fingerprints are unique, totally unique. And God has got a purpose for that. And to discover that and to thrive in that and to be rooted in His love, just like a plant rooted in the compost, and those nutrients. That's the place where you will be the happiest, is to discover that godly mandate and purpose for your life, and where you will thrive. And I felt that call, to minister to the poor of Africa. And that's what we've been doing. And it's been such a joy. And I'm looking forward to see a continent totally transformed by the love of Jesus. Thank you for listening. And thank you, Noah, for initiating this call. Let's pray. Now, Father, I just want to worship you, honor you, and bless you, bless your name for engaging with us, your sons and daughters, and showing us your creation and how you designed it all for our benefit, for our enjoyment, and our sustenance. Thank you, Father, that we can interact with your creation and that we are part of it. Just like the seed needs good soil contact for germination, how much more do we need to be surrounded by your presence for flourishing? So I pray for each one that's on this call or watching this podcast, Lord, that you will right now surround them with your love, with your presence, and every purpose you've intended for each person here, Lord, that the germination in their spirit will happen and it will grow into beautiful trees, fruitful, flourishing people that will bless their communities and those around them and their families, and that they will enjoy the fulfillment of living in their own godly purpose. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you so much, Johann. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. Again, check out the show notes for links to some of the videos Johann mentioned and links to Redeeming the Dirt Academy, or you can just search that, or the wellwatergardenproject.org to find some more resources. But just encourage you guys to continue seeking the Lord and how to reflect Him through agriculture. And until next time, just encourage you to be humble, to be faithful, and to keep redeeming the dirt. God bless.